for those who aren't familiar with their work, let me just tell you a little bit more. Barbara Dossi, PhD, she's an internationally recognized integrative, holistic nursing pioneer. She invented the nurse theory of integral nursing, and she's a Florence Nightingale Scholar. She's also the co-founder of the International Nurse Coach Association and the co-founder of Integrative Nurse Coach Academy and the international co-director of the Nightingale Initiative for Global Health, NIGH. I like to say NI. I think they do too. There's so much more, right? She has authored 31 books, people, and counting. So Barbara Dossi, welcome, welcome. Say something.
Candy, thank you so much. Sharon, it's great to be here. And I am trying to get my camera off and it won't.
Oh,
so it's going to be on your end.
Okay, while you're fiddling with that, I'm going to introduce our friend and your friend and colleague, Dr. Diva Marie Beck, PhD. And Diva Marie comes to us from Canada. She's a Canadian-American nurse, another Nightingale Scholar, a multimedia specialist, a global citizen activist who serves with Barb as the international co-director of the Nightingale Initiative, the NI, Nightingale Initiative for Global Health. It's such a big lot to say. There she is. There's Barb. Diva has worked for 3 decades on approaches to citizen advocacy for achieving global health, a big task, including the UN's global goals, which we now know as the latest iteration of the Sustainable Development Goals, another big mouthful, the SDGs. And she's worked with nurses and midwives who are prime stakeholders for those goals for a long time. So hello, and thank you for being here, Diva Marie.
You're welcome. Thank you, Candy. Great.
Well, ladies, let me just start off by saying that we all agree we are now at a pivotal time in human history in so many different ways. There's an international opportunity, we think, for nurses and midwives to make their talents and their capacities more visible in the world. Barb, why don't you start us off? Tell us why you think Florence Nightingale is relevant for today's world and how you and Diva came up with the idea for NI.
Okay, wonderful. It is such an opportunity to be here and to explore these ideas. I think it's also important to remember that Florence Nightingale was born in 1820 and 1910. She came into our lifetime, and really to put it in perspective, my grandparents were born in 1880. So that really is, the relevance here. Nightingale worked on all the issues that we are working on right now. And the thing that is so relevant about what's going on right now is she began to draft documents and to write documents. And when you spoke about the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Nightingale worked on all of those. And what we know from her work is today we term this the environmental and social determinants of health. Nightingale was working on all of those and doing the initial work collecting the data. So the journey that we have right now is to clearly come together with partnerships. Our work in the world cannot be accomplished unless we are in partnerships. And all of these sustainable development goals are about partnership, and all of them have the thread of good health and well-being. Diva, I'll stop there and let you comment on that too.
Thank you, Barbie. Thank you, Candy and Sharon, for this opportunity to share. The thing about that I see with regard to starting the Nightingale Initiative and Nightingale's relevance, and the point you've made about such challenging times, the thought that we had from the very beginning was that who better to be advocates at a public level for the things we need to have a healthy world, and nurses.
Mhm.
In Nightingale's name, Nightingale did that in her time. She was a global citizen. So this envisioning that the estimated 27 million nurses worldwide, if we were global citizens in the way that Nightingale demonstrated for us, the world would be a better place. And so with the Nightingale Initiative, we're just putting that idea forward and moving that idea along, even though nurses are very stressed doing sick nursing. Nightingale called health nursing what we're calling for. And so we're hoping to engage the people who want to also do health nursing.
Exactly. In fact, that is what I'd like to ask you a little bit more about next. We have a slide of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. If Chad, you could put that up, and we will talk about those goals. I'm going to ask you, Diva, to tell us a little bit more about this.
Okay, thank you. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were identified and passed by the UN General Assembly in 2015 to be worked toward achieving by 2030. As you can see here, there's a really wide range of goals. This is a nice slide to read each of the goals. And of course, nurses are working on good health and well-being, number 3. And you can see there that even the logo sort of idealized an EKG heart for us, because this is what we know. But the other goals have been seen to be health determinants. Clearly, poverty and hunger are health determinants. Clean water is a health determinant. But all the others are health determinants as well. The World Health Organization likes to put up a visual that shows a good goal 3 in the center of all the others, and all of the others impacting upon health. And that's the way we like to show it too.
Well, everyone, thank you for that. You can put the slide up. Thank you, Chad. You know, I just want to say to everyone that Barb and Diva and I and many others have come together as Nightingale fans and scholars to recognize her influence for, well, the foresight she had, like you were saying, in directing all this research and writing about how sanitation, education, and health, that they're all so linked. Well, ladies, I know that you have both thought a long time about what it means to be a global citizen. Barb, could you give us a suggestion about what might be a way that nurses could start or get involved with the SDGs?
That's a wonderful question. I think the main thing to look at is when we look at global citizenship, it is a shift in consciousness. We have to see ourselves as interconnected, and literally we are one. And when we begin to feel that experience, I mean, literally is something that shakes you at the core of your being. You no longer can go around just go, oh, that's their problem, or that's a third world country. Right now, we are one. Anything that impacts me and my family will impact you and your family, and we can just do the ripple effect. So when we look at the SDGs, and this is another thing that's so important about Florence Nightingale, is history is one of the most important aspects of any profession. We are incredibly blessed to have Florence Nightingale as the philosophical founder of professional nursing. And when we explore this avenue, and one thing that Diva and I are certainly looking at is Nightingale's universal spirituality. Let's just start there. Nightingale had a lot of things going against her when she was trying to do reform, because there were no protocols, there were no like-minded colleagues, there was no internet. Can you imagine what Nightingale would have done if she'd had the internet or a cell phone or this capability? It would have been amazing. So what is exciting is in the 1870s, she began to write that she wanted nurses that were bigger, that it was robust, and they would look at the depth and the interconnectedness of all these social and environmental determinants of health that are the UN SDGs now. But all of that existed then. So she was able to go ahead and draft and collect data. And this is one thing that is so important about her work. Most people know about her famous wedge diagram.
Mhm.
And that was where she wanted to show 3 and 4 data sets per month that she was in the Crimean War. No one told her to do that. She collected the data, started analyzing it, and then she got the top statisticians of the day to go over that data with her before she presented it and put that in their final reports. So I think back to global citizenship, it has to do with each of us in our own way, recognizing that we are connected to others. As I mentioned, Nightingale's universal spirituality. And one of the things that Diva and I have been discussing with another friend lately is, what is it about Nightingale that was so enduring? What was it? And what we are sharing with you is that Nightingale had this core. She had a core that held. And so I think this is what I would say to all of us on this call today. We are in such extremely stressful times. The stress at work with our colleagues in the field, with people that are not ending this, pandemic, if we would do what we know science is telling us. And so whenever we feel stressed, and going back to Sharon, your work with what do we do to manage our own stress? And one of the things that we all know how to do, but I will say one of the things that helps me the most is my breath. When I feel myself tense and tight, which can happen because I put 20 things on my list, I get about 14 of them done. But in the meantime, here are all these others that are getting dumped on. And you go, oh man, okay. It's called prioritize. And so the word that I like to use is stay steady. Stay steady. And then looking at Nightingale and what she encountered in her lifetime, one of the things in my research I brought her forward as a 19th century mystic. And we can look at the 5 phases of mystic spiritual development there. Awake is when you are awake and you're literally on fire with what you know you need to be doing. And that's with all of us. How do we create a healthier environment? How do we create a healthier workplace? Then the purgation is then in the mystic development, it's when they don't know what they're supposed to do. How can they feel a connection with the divine? They don't know how to get there. Then illumination is literally on fire. There's no getting you off that course. Then that 4th phase is surrender. All of this is about our work today too. We must surrender to go deeper. Don't be superficial. Let's go deep and let's ask those questions. Who am I? Why am I here at this moment in time? Who can I connect with to shift this consciousness toward caring and healing? Unfortunately, our medical system is still in the medical mode of curing symptoms. We know that what the work is about, though, is about healing. And healing is that lifelong journey. We don't have to ask for it, we're born with it. But frequently we turn it off because we get so stressed. So if we can remember to take a breath in and out, and that's one of the things that I do in my meditation practice, and I try to do it every morning. And I got up this morning. I didn't anticipate we would be talking first. But anyway, I was just sitting there, and the rhythm of a sitting practice to get you out of your head of thinking is in sitting, you've got that strong back and your belly just goes out and in, out and in, strong back, soft front. So it's that strong back that allows us to hold the center. And when we take the breath out, it allows us then to be with another in their suffering and to be there with pure empathy and not drop into trying to fix stuff.
Oh,
So I'll stop right there.
So true. And it's the reminder of her spirituality was her belief in God and her purpose in life. I think that's something that everybody has to do. And thank you. I don't know that we'd all classify ourselves as mystics, but certainly we can look up to her for that. We only have about a minute left for me to ask Diva another question before we go into Q&A in the chat room. So Diva, what would you like to add to all of that?
Well, there's, as Candy, as you know, there's so much to add that it was occurring to me just briefly to say that Barbie and I work like a Mobius strip. She works on the interiority and the stress and individual healing and self-care, and I work on the large global piece. So just to say, based on what Barbie's just shared, that when we're working at global health, nurses want tools. We have our blood pressure cuff, we have our syringe, we have our thermometer, we have all of our high-end ICU monitors now. Global health requires, the tools for global health are communication tools. So we can even be thinking about even that sort of questionable Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of these virtual platforms are all tools to use to impact upon global health in the same way we use tools at the bedside. So that's just a teaser to talk about the other things that we could say about global citizenship.
Okay, well, we would like, let's see, we would like you now to give us some questions if from the audience. If you have a question or a comment, but we'd like a question, if you could just say it in one sentence for our guest, and do that now. And Chad is going to read us the first question that we see as soon as we see it. And meanwhile, while we're waiting for people to type their questions, I would like to say that talking about what happened today, I know our next should have been our first, but our next speaker, Dr. Charmaine Lawson, is in the audience now. We had this technical glitch, Lord knows we don't know why, but suddenly had to give out about an hour and a half before the program, we had to give out a new link. And so a lot of you got that, but a lot of you didn't. So
unfortunately, yeah, we're sorry about that.
Yeah,
The
nothing.
gremlins are wild today in Zoom, on Eventbrite, and everywhere else.
So, all right, let's see. I don't see, do we have a question? Here we go. Chad, can you read us the first question you see?
Sure. How do you teach mindfulness to the nurse at the bedside who is suffering from fatigue and burnout?
Oh,
That comes from Laura.
Right.
Diva, do you want to talk about that one?
Barbie's really good at that.
Barbie's the one. Okay, go for it, Barbie.
Laura, it's a marvelous question. First, I think it's important to if you're a manager, say, with that particular nurse there, is just to remember the breath. It doesn't cost anything. It's with you all the time. And it is a way to down-regulate. And that is the key in this work. And literally the breath in and the breath out. And then as far as in a situation, be it education, clinical research, wherever, you can come together in small groups and have informal sessions or formal sessions. And there are many different kinds of strategies to use. But that breath is the one thing that is really important to look at.
That's good. We have time for one more question. Chad.
All right, we got a question from Nancy. Where do you think education and innovation in education fits into the global leadership?
Diva.
Oh, thank you. That's a good question. The global health nursing educators that I know are focused now on the Sustainable Development Goals, helping us to, because the Sustainable Development Goals are like 17 recipes for cooking up a healthy world. And so talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and certainly describing them and explaining that they were identified by the United Nations, but also to be very clear that these goals will never be achieved unless people at the grassroots, all of us on this call, all of us in this summit, all of us, all the nurses, all the many other people like farmers and architects and sanitation workers, people looking after clean water. We are the grassroots that will actually achieve the goals if they will ever be achieved. So there's a dialogue between the global and the grassroots, and to teach people in education. The SDGs were identified at the UN level, but they will be achieved by you and I, people like us and you and I.
Hey, how y'all doing?
We are so happy to see you.
I am so honored to be here, and I want to tell you, full disclosure, I was waiting in that other room
I know.
since about on my time, Central Time, 10:40. So I was on time. Just want you to know.
We appreciate that so very much.
Yeah.
We didn't have coffee in that other room to greet you.
I know, right? But I got my own because we're virtual. So anyway, so thanks again, Sharon and Candy for having me and asking me to speak at this wonderful event about something I'm really passionate about, and that's creativity and how do you harness it to pivot on purpose. And I guess I need to start back to the beginning of a major incident in my life that really showed me that I guess I can be creative. I guess there's some creativity here, and there's nothing like a little stress to make you think outside of the box, right? So hello, Hurricane Katrina, and I said, oh my God, what am I gonna do? I have an entire community that doesn't have health care, and what can I do with my creativity to have a larger impact on the community, to have great positive patient outcomes, and to be more of a service, and that's where I initially developed the house call program. And we served, as you mentioned, Candice, over the years, I won't say how many, but over the years, we have now served over 100,000 patients in the region. And it was something that was born out of chaos, but I used that to turn it into something positive. So creatively starting the practice and then looking at, okay, how can I do more? So I thought of the word replication. How do I replicate to increase my impact in the community? So I started the house call course back in 2008. And that's a course that teaches clinicians from around the world, anybody who wants to come. Well, now we're still not live yet, debating if we want to go back live in live sessions. But I've trained to date over 6,000 clinicians from all over who have started home care, house call practices in their rural areas to serve the underserved, to serve the marginalized communities who otherwise wouldn't receive health care. And we're talking about patients who are not only homebound, but in some cases bedbound. So that's the house call course. And then from that, creatively, I added to that with books, because you have to further expand and replicate with then becoming an author and writing books. So we have a few books out on house calls. They're called House Calls 101. And then I have a policy and procedure manual. And then, of course, replication, further creativity, I said, well, these books need to be in all formats, right? So they're ebooks, they're paperback, hardcover, and working on Audible. I'm just trying to see if people will respect my Louisiana accent before I do. So we're debating about that. So, but anyway, so that's how I use my creativity for just pivoting in the midst of chaos after Hurricane Katrina. So, okay, everything's going along okay, then boom. Hello, COVID. Okay, now we're talking 2020. Not only am I dealing with COVID, but I'm a single mommy because my ex-husband passed away in October of 2020. So now I'm pivoting with two kids in tow. We're talking school-age kids, 11 and 8. what do you do? All right, so my thriving practice now, where everybody's just like, we don't know, we've never been in a pandemic, and it's just trying to figure that out. So how do we pivot again? Most of my patients, we had to pivot and make everybody telehealth. So we switched almost everyone to the telehealth platform. And at the same time, I, of course, had Nola the nurse. So I switched most of it was books, activity books, and we have the doll to go along with the brand. But I said, now we need to kick it up a notch because almost all kids are at home and people are now being homeschooled, on their own, just trying to figure this out, right? So I said, we now need to get into maybe animation. So now we're working on animating Nola the nurse, and that is help me. It's been a really tough thing because that's totally out of my bandwidth and scope of practice and everything else you want to add in there. So it's coming along, but I want you to see that as yet another way of using creativity to just pivot on purpose. And again, looking at how do I have better impact? How can I serve my community better? Initially with Hurricane Katrina with home visits, and then of course replicating that, getting other clinicians to do the same. But then now going into, pandemic days and Hurricane Ida. Okay, so we look at now not only offering those services, but what about the children who are at home? How can we have greater impact with the children who are at home who, may want to know what a nurse practitioner does, who, may want to know what a midwife does. And that's what our books do. They do simple introductions into the world of advanced practice nursing. And so I would just say, in closing, because I know I have 20 minutes and I forgot to put my timer on, but I know I have 20 minutes, but just when you're faced with something, as we all are, globally, we were faced with the pandemic, you just have to think of ways that you're going to stretch beyond the chaos and also simultaneously make a difference in your community. And also at the same time, find a way whereas it will release some of the bad energies that are going on with you, because for me creativity does that. It's a form of self-care for me, and that's how I see it. So I'm getting the synergistic effect when I'm writing books. It's a form of self-care. That's how I'm bringing all of my bad energies down. That's how I take my 8-year-old will say, he says, "Mommy, can you do a 10 count? 10, 9, 8?" So I'm like, okay, that's my way of counting down is, okay, let me write a little story. Okay, how should this sketch go? So you have to find creatively what works for you. And so for me, being a writer, creator, director now of this automated series is how I deal with pivoting on purpose.
Excellent.
Wow.
And, isn't it true that just that we've so nicely into what Barb was talking about, just breathing,
I know.
breath, centering yourself.
Segue into it was beautiful. I want to comment on that as well. First of all, talk about creativity. You could not clone yourself. You replicated the process. What
Yes.
better than that?
Yes.
That definitely works. And when you started to talk about the animation, I started to think about, wow, will Nurse Nola be the next game that kids will gravitate to?
Yes.
Play? Because
Yeah.
she'll really bring things to life, won't she?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And all of these things are what's, on my forecast. But with most entrepreneurs, I mean, you're only as successful as the people around you in your immediate circle who are on that level you want to be on. So, if anybody knows animators, anybody knows anyone who can help or give me guidance, I'm looking forward to that. That's why I'm always happy to speak on almost anywhere somebody asks me to, because you just never know who's listening and who knows who, there's no longer 6 degrees of separation. There's more like 3, 2 in some cases, especially when you're a part of the academy, right, Sharon? So,
Exactly. Yeah, within the academy, that's absolutely true.
yeah.
Charmaine, I really want to thank you. Your presentation this morning, even though it was a little delayed, was heart-wrenching when you started to talk about your husband passing and whatnot. You brought me to tears.
Yeah.
I want to say we give you thumbs up.
Mhm.
We want everyone else thumbs up, hearts, or applause.
Mhm.
Let us know that you enjoyed this presentation by Dr. Charmaine Lawson. We explore the idea of leading through public service. I'll start with Dr. Katie Boston Leary, who is a board certified nurse executive and coach. Another person the media loves to interview. Among her accolades, she works as the director of nursing programs, Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation with the ANA. And in 2019, she was listed by Health Leaders Journal as one of the 5 chief nursing officers changing healthcare. Wow, Katie, that is really exciting. We want to say thanks for being here today. Can you give us a shout out?
Yes, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, Sharon. Nice to be here with you and Candy.
Thanks.
I've been waiting for this. I've been looking forward to this event, so thank you.
And we've been waiting to hear from you. It's obvious you have a heart for nurses. And Katie, we brought in another top leader with a heart to be your sparring partner here today, Tom Dahlborg, with over 37 years as a healthcare leader and also as a heart patient who was informed he would never work again and to get in line for a heart transplant. Wow. He definitely knows what it's like to be on both sides of the patient experience. And he continues to drive the transformation of healthcare with the concept of health caring. He also gives back through his public service devoted to child advocacy work to end bullying, address ACEs, and improve health and well-being of communities. Tom, we're so glad you're doing well, and thanks to you for being here.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Appreciate it. So glad to have you both with us. It's obvious that both of you are givers. We all know that theory, givers gain. Let's start with you, Tom. Tell us about the ACEs program, what it is, and what happened to motivate you to get involved.
Well, let me start here. So it was actually a few years ago, and my bride and I were out on the deck, and we were just enjoying the morning. And I remember my son coming out and joining us there, and he said, "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something. When I was in the 4th grade, and he's 25 now, he said, the pain was so great. I put a belt around my neck. I didn't want to live anymore." And that discussion itself, that actually occurred a year after I had published my bullying prevention book. The Stop Bullying message in that book had led to speaking engagements and other opportunities. And yet here I was, not even aware of the level of pain my son felt, the level of pain he felt from being bullied, and the drastic measure he almost took. So it was this, and I saw it as a failure. I failed my son. And driven in part by this failure, I've dedicated myself to work to end bullying for all children, and have expanded that into the healthcare arena because of the crisis there as well. And also to really focus on amplifying positive childhood experiences to mitigate the adverse childhood experiences that so many children have experienced, and especially now, and in addition to now, during the pandemic. So I learned I couldn't dwell on my failure. Over time, I learned to fail forward, as I learned from a good friend of mine over at IHI, and to use my failure as fuel for good, to use it in what I learned to be of service to others, and to try to help make things better, and to reframe that failure again as fuel for good.
Wow, what a profound story. That makes perfect sense. But not everyone reacts the way to difficult situations and childhood trauma. Thank you so much for doing the work that you do. And we really appreciate the fact that you brought it to our attention today. Now, Katie, you have taken community engagement to an entirely new level in your work as a nurse executive. But you didn't start there, did you? What's your story, and how did you find your passion for public health?
Well, I think the thing started, and by the way, Tom, that's, thank you for your bravery in sharing that story. That was quite profound. And it struck me because my daughter, not experiencing bullying, but she, during the pandemic, she had some mental health issues too. So that struck in my heartstrings. So thank you for sharing that. Sharon, so it didn't happen overnight, right? When you're busy initially as a nurse and you're trying to establish yourself and learn new skills and build on your skills, it's mostly about that. Eventually, and for some people, it starts early where they decide on a cause and a mission and community service area that drives them. Some cases, it starts from childhood. For me, it came a little late, unfortunately. I've always been involved with community service from here and there. And while you're working as a nurse, sometimes the tail wags the dog, where you're not necessarily doing what you want to do, but you're doing community service based on what the organization needs, right? Let's say they send out an email to volunteer to do something, and you go do it. But does it necessarily pull on your heartstrings? Not in every case. So what happened for me is when I finished my doctorate degree, I really, then it hit me that after that, I was forever changed. I felt that I wanted to be involved in social change, which is why I switched careers. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, working for the American Nurse Association, because I wanted that broader impact and policy and raising the platform. So during that transition, which was a bit dark for me because I was letting go of one role and entering into another. And as much as at the time when I made the decision, I was excited about that, I all of a sudden felt lost because there was radio silence. And how do you go from being one of the, in such high demand where your phone's constantly going off to nothing at all? And I wasn't prepared for that. So I struggled with that mightily, where I started going through my old Yahoo accounts and accounts that I haven't used in a while because I felt that, okay, maybe someone there needs me and I can respond to all these sales reps and things like that. So something made me, while I was driving around the community, and I had a period of maybe a couple of months between ending one role and starting where I am, I was driving and I saw a fine need for volunteers at a food kitchen near where I lived. Mm-hmm. And I had heard about it. So I went there, filled out the paperwork, started working there, and it was such meaningful work. There was something about it that really pulled on me, where all of a sudden I was so content with just being one of the people working in that kitchen. I never told them what I do. I never told them who I was. They just saw someone in their 40s that's working here, that's here during the day, that should be at work. So maybe she's a lost soul. And I found that people started giving me career advice, which I totally took because I wanted them to feel valued, right? I didn't want to dismiss them. So I would have a lot of people there, a lot of older people giving me advice. But my role there was mostly rotated between sweeping the dining room and wiping the tables, 3 types of cleaning, where it's water, bleach, and soap, or working in the kitchen, cleaning pots and pans. And I have to tell you, I was so content with that. I attacked that like it was my full-time job. I mopped with pride and pleasure. I would listen to podcasts at times while I was doing it, even though a lot of the older folks didn't like that. I was doing that, they wanted my attention, but it was something about doing that really made me realize that was a missing element in my life. So that has forever changed me, where with what I do, I always look for where I can volunteer, and I still volunteer in food kitchen, by the way. And there's a food kitchen for less fortunate, where anyone can come in and eat a hot meal. And the pandemic changed things where they closed down and they've changed the way they do business. But the pride and pleasure I had in working and serving was as much. I felt as good as I felt the first day when I at my first nursing job. That's how good it was.
Wow. Wow, that is really exciting. You know, it's interesting when you shared about mopping, you said it with such vim and vigor. It sounded as if you bring such energy even to that mop handle. You, Katie, give energy to all that you do, and those whose lives you touch are so blessed as a result of that.
Thank
So
you.
when you were talking, you're very welcome. When you were talking about tugging at your heart, well, you tugged at my heart from that story. I too have worked in soup kitchens and in missions and in other places. You know, as nurses, we all study population health, and we have projects that we have to do beyond the hospital walls. Seriously, some of my most poignant moments was when I was out in the field, literally working to find some help to solve a problem in the community. I was fortunate, not working only in my own community, but having the opportunity to work in communities abroad in the new independent states of the former Soviet Union and in Central and Eastern Europe when I was involved in creating the healthcare infrastructure for those areas. Part of that were community health projects and women's health projects. So being able to see firsthand the challenges that people faced and being able to be a part of the solution and the process, hands-on, actually doing the work, was so, so rewarding. As nurses, we all have good intentions, but can you give us some practical solutions for how we can move beyond our didactic knowledge and our intentions to strategically impact the lives of others for good?
Yeah, I think it starts with having a self-check of your own where you are, right? You know, what does well-being look like for you? Because you have to do your own checks to be able to know what you can give to other people. And one of so I'm going to try to get to your answer in a roundabout way. So I'm going to answer your question a little bit. So recently I read a book on well-being at work by Gallup, where they really started to just peel back what does well-being mean. And this topic does apply to well-being, right? Because they identified 5 areas of well-being that employers should be aware of with their teams. It's career well-being, social well-being, financial, physical, and community, right? So we're going to focus on community for the sake of this discussion. But with the story that I just gave you, there is value in your well-being to give to others. But you have to recognize that so it doesn't feel like a chore or you're checking a box. So with community well-being, it really entails understanding, because a lot of us with where we work, even though we try to say separate yourself in terms of your personal life and your professional life are separate, they're really not. You're one person. And if things are not going well at home, of course it's going to impact work and vice versa. So it is that check that you have to have where you need to understand and ask yourself about the community that you live in, how you're giving to it, how could you make your community better, how can you help change it if it's not, what events or activities you can get involved in, and what would you enjoy getting involved in. So there are key elements that you need to understand to get there. And then when you're giving to others, and I also always talk about if you're a leader, you have to have social capital, where it's not just about what people are pouring into you, but you're pouring into other people. And social capital really, it's not just about the role model. And I actually say you have to have a role model, a mentor, a professional peer that you're soundboarding against. Your boss, of course, is a part of that, or your manager. But you also have to have a professional junior, someone that you're pouring into and someone that you're mentoring, because there's bidirectional benefit in having that. And then lastly, having a loving critic, where it's kind of like how your mom would tell you you're getting fat when you go to your Thanksgiving. You have someone at work that will tell you what you're not doing so well at work. So we all need those checks. And in all of this, even with serving and providing community service, there's that humility that we all need, right? The higher you go and the longer you've been doing something, at some point you need some way that you can get humble so that you can continue to understand that you're still learning.
Wow. That was, I love the concept of social capital. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just a huge wow. Now let me ask you, Tom, about the idea of bullying. What are some ways we can address that problem in the community as well as in the workplace?
First I'd like to say to Katie, again, I love the different lenses you just brought to the table, the connectivity, and of course that loving critic. So I think that's really, really terrific. I also wanted to hone in a little bit here in that bullying space with the good intentions. And there's an old saying, the highway to hell is paved with good intentions. And good intentions are important, especially when we think of service and being of service to others. And yet, we must focus on both the heart, that good intention, and the mind, the right action based on evidence to truly be of service and to truly make a difference. And in this case, addressing bullying. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to make a positive impact and to make things better, to achieve excellence for self and others. And neither heart alone or mind alone will get us there. So for example, when we think of healthcare and the current level of bullying, there have been many good intentioned solutions, and yet often the evidence did not support them. And they end up doing more harm than good. So as an example, conflict resolution and peer mediation. These are common, well-intentioned strategies for dealing with issues of bullying in healthcare. But a few notes around that. Number one, bullying is not a conflict. It's a form of victimization. These strategies send the wrong message. It's basically saying, well, you're both partly right and you're both partly wrong. And we need to work out this conflict between you. And number three around this, there's no evidence that conflict resolution or peer mediation stops bullying. Again, it actually leads to less reporting of bullying and thus less positive impact. And when we also think about another strategy we use in healthcare for lots of different things, and I used to be a CFO, so I'm all over the financial incentives, financially incentivizing people to do the right thing in service to others. And so when you think about, so from Harvard Business Review, what they found was financial rewards do not create lasting commitment. They merely and temporarily change what we do. And two, the financial rewards, and when the financial rewards are in play, people will no longer look intrinsically to be of service to others, and thus will continue to require extrinsic incentives to do so, more incentive, more financial incentive. So that, again, that good intention is essential, and we need to marry it, that heart, with the evidence, the mind. With one or the other, we do harm, but with both, we can do wondrous things. We can truly be of service and make a positive difference.
We certainly can. And when we start to think about the concept of heart and mind, they do need to merge. They need to be at that intersection that allows us to really move forward and eliminate that bullying. You know, you often talk about fanning the flame of goodness when you're speaking of health caring, which when you speak of it, by the way, I see the glow in your eyes. You speak about it with such passion. What is that? And can you share an example?
So what I found is that those of us that work in healthcare, those of us who work in public service, we're fixers. We see something broken and we want to fix it to achieve excellence, to be of service. And yet the research shows when we solely focus on the brokenness, we often disengage those people we most need to be engaging. So as leaders, when we think about health caring, we must also identify what's right, that flame of good, and then fan that flame. And oftentimes to do so, this requires us as leaders to seek to understand how far, as an example, how far people have come in their own journey. So connecting it back to some of my days in service to my community and coaching youth recreational basketball, which was actually a tool that we used to help my son deal with the bullying that was happening. So I remember one particular game, and I remember one particular timeout during a game, and looking up at the scoreboard and seeing that we were getting beat, and we were getting beat bad. And I remember looking at my team and talking with them at that time, and then pointing up at the scoreboard and noting that those numbers shining down on us did not know the mountains of which this team and each team member had climbed, the progress each team member had made, and all they had overcome. And I remember, Sharon, really thinking about, as I looked in the eyes of each one of these team members, and thinking how that score did not measure the challenges these specific children had faced and were continuing to face. challenges such as abuse, abandonment, addiction, body image issues, the death of a parent, and so much more. And as leaders, we must recognize where possible that goodness, that progress, and that effort. And in doing so, what happens is we start to show that we actually care about the people. We bring that humanity and that compassion into our leadership, that heart-centered leadership. We're building relationships, we're building trust, we're engaging, and quite frankly, and I've seen this both in my coaching and in my career, we may even save a life. So continuous improvement and making things better, or ending bullying and so forth, it must be addressed, and it must be addressed clearly and efficiently and effectively. And by also fanning that flame of good, we're far better positioned to successfully not only improve, but to also position the individuals to want to improve and to want to continue on their journey to do so, because now they know we care about them as people, not as just a doctor, just a nurse, just a housekeeper. And I was a housekeeper back in the day. None of us are just us. We're human beings here to help, and we can position them by fanning their flame of good.
Wow, what an amazing answer. You know, I love when you talk about focusing not on what's broken, but on what is good. It sounds like the premise, if you will, for a parenting manual that we should all be reading as we bring young lives into the world and mold them for our future. So now I have a question for both of you. If you could work at anything you wanted, what might that be? Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so, and you're talking about skill set or attributes or
anything you'd like to do, what would that be? What would that role be? What role would you fill?
what role would I fill? Well, you know, one thing that I know that I'm working on, and it's really very important, particularly during times like this, and it builds on what Tom said earlier too, I believe. It's moral leadership, right? And what's required today for leaders to be more open about what they believe in. It's, you know, you know, starting with what's good and fanning the flame is good, which I love what Tom said about that. It's that appreciative inquiry piece, right? You know, where you're building on what's positive, but if we all stripped everything away, which is what, you know, the times that we're in, COVID did, and you go back to the basics, right? Put aside our political differences and everything. What we all want are typically the same things, right? We want security, we want safety, we want our kids to go to good schools and do well, we want integrity. I think that's where moral leadership to me comes in, because I think a lot of us can find a lot more in common with each other if we go back to those foundational aspects of where we are and what makes us who we are. So that's something that I know that I'm intentionally and deliberately working on, because it does require intentional work. With a lot of what's out there today, and particularly with the people that you lead, what's happening in the environment and what's filling your ears and your eyeballs, or a lot of the other superficial things that divide us even more. And I think if we I would like to put more intentional work, and I've been really working on this to understand how to go back to the basics on what's good in everyone, what we all want, and just start there where we can just find commonality and work together. So that, you know, if you work from that standpoint, the other things matter much less. So that's the work that I'm doing. And of course, I have something else I'm working on with being comfortable with silence. I find that, you know, when I am having conversations with folks, and if they're within my earshot and what have you, and I do with my husband too, you know, even when I don't have anything important to say, if it goes like 5 minutes and we're not talking to each other, or we're not talking, I have to fill it with something. He's like, could you just be comfortable with, I was like, you're right. I don't do that well. Right. And especially when you're coaching, when you want people to think through what they want to say, or the next thing they're going to say, you have to be comfortable with silence. So that's something that I'm definitely definitely working on.
Right. Silence is golden, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Truly,
Absolutely.
it truly is golden. What about you, Tom?
Wow. First of all, that moral leadership perspective, I mean, it's right there. And it makes me think about what's the definition that I hear so often? The definition of integrity is doing what's right when no one's looking. And I'm
Mhm.
always like, yeah, that makes sense. However, what if we did what's right always? What if we did what's right when everyone's looking and it's unpopular? That to me links so very well to the moral leadership, because that's what we need. And then specific to the question, I talk often about, so I coached basketball and I did it for certain reasons. And I coach today healthcare leaders and I coach my team. And so I think, at the end of the day, and similar to what Katie just said, it's coaching. And what I found was coaching youth and coaching healthcare leaders, they're both incredibly challenging. They're both incredibly rewarding. And it forces you, and I know it forced me to look in the mirror and really understand my own fallibility, recognize where, again, where I had my growing edges, where I could be better, where I could help. And then learning from my son. So again, I told you that story earlier. Now he has a podcast called Strength Through Vulnerability, where he's helping others. He's talking about seeking psychiatric help and still in counseling, and he's helping others who have been bullied and in other areas as well. And it's that what I learned from him is this courageous vulnerability to put yourself out there when everyone's looking, when there's peer pressure, where there's biases, where there's stigma, and still be that leader and still be that coach. And I say to him often, I want to grow up and be like my son. And I want to be able to help. And whether it's as a coach or not, I'm not sure. But between what Katie said and what I've learned from my son, I think that would be a rewarding life.
Yeah, it's that there's a country song about I want to be just like you, but it's in reverse. It really is. You want to be just like the young person you've brought into this world, who clearly is a role model for you. And how exciting can that be?
Absolutely.
That was great. That was really awesome. I really appreciate your focus on coaching and bringing it down also to the youth level. I coached youth soccer for a long time. I did it after I played ladies soccer for about 8 years. And I did that until I broke all my metatarsals on the most magnificent goal you've ever seen in your whole life. But I was no longer able to play. So I took what I learned and what not to do to avoid that sort of a situation and brought it to the coaching spectrum. But I always enjoyed the under 6s and the under 8s. I thought that they were a lot of fun. Coaching with your son might have been a little bit different. There was more interaction. I would think that would be fun. I would think that would really be great.
It was incredibly fun. Incredibly
I'm
fun.
Sure.
And what I learned was that the X's and O's, which I needed to learn myself, were the least important thing that I was teaching these kids. And the least important thing I was learning from these kids and from others. It was so many of them. We talked about the aces that they were dealing with and all the other aspects. And just like we heard earlier, when we're working with our teams, there's so much going on in their lives. We still need to connect with them on that human level and really understand to help them both on the court and off the court, or in the hospital or outside the hospital.
Exactly. And it is that focus. It's that element that brings it all into being and that establishes that heart message.
Yeah.
Heart message that we attempt to get across each and every day in every way, because that truly is such an important part of service excellence, isn't it?
It certainly
Absolutely.
is. And, I think that we would be remiss if we didn't do a couple of things. One of them is that Katie hasn't really said much about this huge program that she's in charge of over at ANA. That's Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation.
And I'm a part of it. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, well, we all are, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Candy. Yes, Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation has been in place since May of 2017, and I'm honored to be entrusted with such a gem of a program. it's a free resource for anyone. You don't have to be a nurse. So Tom, I'm going to get you on there. And and a lot of our nurses have family members on there, and you log on and you complete a heat map survey where it gives you your numbers in terms of where you are and how you compare to other people in your age group and with your demographics. And you continue to use that to see whether you can improve your health. And we use a socio-ecological model with the Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation. Bottom line, it's really not, self-care is not just limited to yourself. It takes a village, right? It takes the community that you live in, your family, your friends, your place of work to care for you to stay well. And we focus on all the domains that I mentioned earlier, physical, physiological, spiritual, financial as well. And we just added mental health as a pillar for one of our, which gives us 6. We added mental health, and it's not because we haven't paid attention to that over the years. We had it included under our quality of life pillar. But given where nurses are and the issues that exist currently with not just nurses, but globally with mental health, we decided that it had to stand on its own. Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation has a number of resources for anyone to partake in. A lot of people that are leaders in this space and it's also, the best part of it is that there's a community where people grow and develop in their wellness space together, in this wellness space together. So I encourage everyone to be a part of that. And I'll put it in the chat. It's healthynursehealthynation.org. And we'll love to see you there. We have and somewhere north of 270,000 members.
Wow.
And it's growing. So our goal is to get 4.2 million nurses and then some. It's really about nurses role modeling health for the nation. So by all means, and thank you for mentioning that. We're excited about Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation.
It is an exciting program. It is truly, and it's a joy to be a part of it. I know Candy agrees as well. The presentations that you two just gave on this panel really sparked tremendous interest and lots of comments. Chad, why don't we move over to you and let us know if there are any questions in the chat to which our colleagues can respond.
And while we're waiting for that information, we want to invite people to write your questions or comments in there.
Again, just one sentence. I was remiss not to say that. And mention either Katie or Tom's name if you want to direct your question to only one person. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
And
Go ahead, Candy.
like I say, while we're waiting, Tom has something else that he does along this line of leading by public service. Do you want to talk about the health caring program?
I sure do. And it's really about, again, bringing humanity back into healthcare. We've gone so far with focusing, just like we talked earlier, so much on the evidence and the science and the technology, which are all incredibly important. And we need to ensure we're balancing that, again, balancing heart and mind with the compassion, the empathy, quite frankly, the love within healthcare, the love for another. I remember it was Dr. Abraham Verghese talks about the eye patient and how currently the eye patient has become more important than the human being in front of us as we're looking at electronic health records, as we're looking at all the data, and we're forgetting to have that human connection with our patients. And so when we think about such things as social needs, it's about establishing relationship and establishing that trust and creating that safe place to have that real conversation. Because just going through, as an example, a checklist, asking questions in the checklist just to fill in the blanks doesn't get us anywhere other than filling in the blanks. When we have that relationship and that trust and that safety, we'll actually hear the real truths, those real nuggets that then as clinicians and as team members, as clinical teams together, we can identify how can we best support this patient? How can we best position this patient in this family and quite frankly, this community to address all the social factors, to address all the things that are happening here. So again, it's about bringing humanity back into healthcare.
We have a question for Tom. Thank you, Tom, for that. Laura asks, bullying in the work, excuse me, bullying in the workplace occurs with pressure to work more hours to nursing shortages. How can a nurse set up boundaries to maintain safe practice?
I love this question. I'm actually married to a nurse. My bride's a nurse, and I hear these stories. And I remember one story she told me. She was working in a veterans home, and I believe the nurse to patient ratio was 1 to 40, 1 to 40. And you couldn't be safe. You couldn't help. Your behaviors became informed by, driven by the stresses that they were under. And so it's so important to have a multi-lens view around all these things. So for my bride, she spoke her truth. She shared with leadership and so forth, and they didn't make changes, and she knew she needed to leave. And so that was her choice, was to leave. But we don't all have that option. And we really need to figure out how to get through that. And one of the tools that I've become very, that has resonated closely with me, is the Schwartz rounding out of the Schwartz Center at Mass General.
Right.
And Schwartz rounding, for those who may not be familiar, if you think about the terminology around rounding on patients and clinical rounds, those types of things, this is where nurses and other members of the clinical team round on each other, come together and talk about the stresses. It's not a vent session. It's a session where, if I'm a nurse and I just held, and I hear these stories from my bride all the time and from people I work with, I just held a mother as their child passed. And then I have to have 14 more visits in the next X amount of time to make sure I'm keeping up with my doctor as he's generating RVUs and so on and so forth. We need that. All of us need that time to come together as peers and talk about what we're feeling, what we're going through. And this would apply for the physicians and everyone else as well. And really think about how we can care for one another, where we can actually put, again, evidence to what's happening as far as the nursing shortages and those ratios and so forth, so we can bring that to leadership. How we can ensure that our behaviors themselves, that we take ownership for it and we manage that in this peer group, and we bring that out and we show as leaders what we can do within this space. And at the end of the day, again, really think about, is this the right place for me? Because I'm hearing and seeing more and more those nurse to patient ratios going from 1 to 4 to 1 to 8 to 1 to 9 on med surg floors during the day and so forth. And it's harmful, and it's harming patients, and it's harming our nurses. And we need to do better as leaders. And we need to partner with the nurses. We need to partner with those folks on the front lines and really listen to understand. And again, I was a CFO. And really think about how we can do it better and keep those doors open, because it can be done, it is done, and it's not done enough.
Yeah, and if I may build on that, Sharon, as well, and Tom, I agree with a lot of what you said. There is a culture of tough it out, toughening people up, and there is some wallpaper bullying that occurs. And especially with old policies and approaches to leading teams. Going back to the analogy previously about how to lead and using a coaching approach to leading, that's very much in the literature now, that particularly in healthcare, managers need to be more like coaches. They should be more aspirational. They should be more inspirational as well to lead the team. And these types of policies that have been long a part of the culture in nursing needs to be torn apart, because I've even seen in my feeds about asking for time off, where it is this game of, I submit, I don't hear back, and maybe I'll hear, and then you get denied, and then it's, if you want time off for go and take care of it on your own and ask someone else, knowing that you're not going to get it. Like all those, and I'm guilty, because I worked for years as a chief nursing officer, so that happened under my watch as well. So there are a lot of things, like the expectations to work extra hours, like the process for PTO, even requesting time off. How meaningful would it be if there was a category between calling out sick and taking vacation, where there is, it's okay to check the box for a mental day, right? And a lot of these policies and approaches to leading and managing teams, or leading teams, needs to change. And part of that change comes with co-creation, where you're working with nursing and nurses to address these issues. Shared governance is another way where there should be meetings and councils to address these issues and have a clear process of escalation if things are not addressed. Those are all the things that need to be done, because a lot of what, Laura, what you have here is a typical phenomenon, and unfortunately it's been long accepted as the way to do things in nursing to get coverage, and we have to move away from that.
That's interesting. You know, I just want to comment on one thing that you said, Katie, when you talked about PTO and whatnot, and that there should be a category in the middle. What if we change the whole concept of PTO from paid time off to a personal time out?
Mhm.
We all need it, don't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah, definitely. And it should be, and the message that we'll be sending, even if it's not used, right? I remember years ago, during my time at CNO, we created a sleep room, right, with a broom closet that no one was using. That, staff to donate, a lot of the stuff that was in there. We got it up to snuff, where it had massage chairs, a TV, music, a little fan play box, and everything. And did it get used to the level that we anticipated it would when we put it in place? No. But the fact that it was there meant so much. So I think it's similar to what, Sharon, what you're saying. It doesn't mean that it's going to be an avalanche where everyone's going to be taking that time. It's just a message and how symbolic it is to have policies like that and procedures like that in place. What people really do know, or employees do know, that their organization leaders care about their well-being.
Yeah, they really do. Do we have other questions in the chat that we can ask our colleagues to respond to, or?
No.
Okay, I see lots of comments, they're not
Yeah, a lot of
questions.
comments, yep.
Yeah, why don't you share a couple of those comments with our audience?
Okay, well, Michelle says, great point, Laura. In the midst of the pandemic, our nurses need more support than ever. Thank you for sharing your insight, Tom. Self-care is essential. I often find that as associates take PTO, they are still logging in and responding to their emails. It is so important to really step away and renew and refresh.
Wow, how true. That is so very true. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just ask Katie, you referred to what we know as shared governance and so forth. And since those concepts have come out in the literature, gosh, it's been, I think 20 years now, hasn't it been, I think, at least. Now, I know, again, we're getting into the wonderful programs that ANA has, but my question to you, since you've been in the forefront there, the magnet journey is tremendous. And I know it cost a hospital something to put it in place because it's a lot of data collection. It's a lot of causing new ways of grouping, all having to do with exactly what you and Tom were talking about having the infrastructure so that the grassroots has an actual sounding board, not just a suggestion box where it's gonna, be ignored, something like that. But Katie, since you know more about this, I'd like to ask you, because I know a lot of nurses hear about the magnet journey. A lot of hospitals are on it, but a lot of hospitals don't even bother because they're small. Is there a way of getting more and more hospitals who are not huge to be a part of this journey to establish those kinds of along the pathway, as we say?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned Pathway. So we have two designations for organizations. We have Magnet and we have Pathway to Excellence.
Pathway to Excellence, yeah.
And Pathway to Excellence, I actually was able to lead an organization that I led in as a CNO to a redesignation for Pathway to Excellence and won the annual award. Pathway to Excellence is good for smaller hospitals because and it's good for every hospital, but particularly for smaller organizations because it moves away from a lot of data collection where it's mostly focused on work environment. And work environment is very important today, right? The pain points that nurses are experiencing. And I always say this because I know that there's been a heavy focus and emphasis on resiliency programs. That is not a silver bullet. There's so much more that needs to be addressed, and it's not enough to say, okay, here's some tools to be strong nurses. Now, continue to suffer, but as you're suffering, here's some tools to make you stronger. We have to figure out how to remove these pain points, right, to what Laura was mentioning earlier. So Pathway to Excellence is really about work environment, where you set up these cultures and you set up infrastructure for shared governance, and you're constantly setting up ways for you to understand and do barometer checks on how the team is doing. It also requires an assessment of the chief nursing officer and leaders in terms of how they're leading, and it's survey based. So and it's anonymous, where I don't get to see the data, but when you apply for a Pathway to Excellence designation, and you get a CNO survey that goes out to the masses of a lot of nurses that you don't even interface with, and if they give not so good positive feedback about you, you're not going to get the designation. And that indicates that the buck stops here, right? It stops at the top. I'm accountable, even though I can't be everywhere and every time and know everybody's name. But the other key candidate to share governance, where I think it's kind of fallen to the wayside, if there isn't a process of escalation in your shared governance council, then it does feel like a suggestion box. You have to have a way for a lot of the feedback and information that's being shared at the councils and within that infrastructure to go to the masses, where there's bidirectional exchange of information, and it has to escalate to the board. And if it doesn't go that far, or even to the C-suite, then you have to wonder how effective that shared governance structure is. So that's my, and that's where you have situations where things that have been normalized in nursing for years, that was the example earlier, would hopefully get addressed, right? And be dealt with head on with folks that are involved in making those decisions, so they can move to a different model. And given the times that we're in, where nurses are suffering right now, and because of the pandemic, and it's exposing a lot of the ills that we have in the profession, there's a lot of good in what we do and what we've done so far. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot that we have to fix because of what we're seeing with the exodus of talent and competency in nursing, particularly where patients are sickest and where care is needed the most right now.
Right. That's what probably one of the biggest challenges that we face right now. We've always had cyclical nursing shortages, and people have always dropped out of the profession. But I think there's truly such a huge concern right now in our time, this very day, about what that might look like. And I served as a magnet appraiser for quite some time.
I know you did.
And really enjoyed the experience. I'll be honest, I did a patient visit with someone once by dog sled. It was probably one of the highlights of.
Yeah,
of
you have. I have to read your book, Sharon. I know there's going to be a lot there.
Yeah, lots there. So no, I really appreciate that you basically explained the whole concept of Pathway to Excellence.
Yeah, and I want to say this too. Even if you don't go for the designation, right? Just follow the blueprint, right? Just follow the blueprint on how to be excellent. Curtail it to what works for the culture of your organization, and you'll be fine. And continually measure where you are. And I know that's kind of self-defeating because, that's part of one of the programs that we market, but it's really about what we want for our patients and what we want for our nurses. And you follow those blueprints and the philosophy around that, organizations will be in a lot better place than they are right now.
Organizations will be healthy organizations.
Absolutely.
In healthy nations, right? They too will be healthy. Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much, Katie and Tom.